He thought he was just helping a stranger with a dead battery. He didn't know she owned the entire company his job depended on. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The frost still clung to the corners of Ethan's windshield, the kind that refused to melt no matter how high he cranked the heat. His breath lingered in the air, swirling in the cab of his beat-up pickup as the engine grumbled beneath the hood. Morning light hadn't fully broken through the fog yet. Maple Ridge always felt quieter on days like this, muffled like the whole world was still deciding whether or not to wake up. He turned onto Route 9, the back road he always took when he needed to clear his head before opening the garage. Hank wouldn't be in for another hour, and Ethan liked the silence. No phones ringing, no customers complaining about the price of brake pads, just the hum of tires and the occasional crow crying somewhere far off in the fields. Then he saw it, a white coupe, sleek and modern, parked crooked on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking like a heartbeat out of rhythm. A woman stood beside it, her arms crossed tightly against her chest, steam rising from her mouth in short, visible bursts. She was dressed too light for the cold. Black coat, scarf, thin gloves that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. He passed her. Then he hit the brakes. The rear of the truck fishtailed slightly as he reversed. He didn't think twice, just parked behind the car, grabbed his jumper cables, and stepped out into the cold. His boots crunched on the gravel as he approached. "Battery dead, yeah?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. The woman looked up. Her eyes were sharp, striking, but there was no entitlement in her face, just frustration and a flicker of surprise that someone had stopped. "I think so. It just clicked, then nothing." "Pop the hood. I'll take a look." She did, and Ethan got to work without another word. The cables clamped, sparks jumped. Within seconds, the engine purred to life. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. "You saved my morning." Ethan smiled faintly, already coiling the cables. Just a jump start. He didn't know her name, didn't know she owned the whole damn company that made the car, and he didn't know she was about to change everything. VVV. She watched him work without saying much, her breath misting in the air as she rubbed her gloved hands together. He moved like someone who'd done this 1,000 times, not rushed, not showy, just steady, methodical, the kind of calm that only came from years of solving problems no one else wanted to touch. Her eyes followed every movement, but she stayed quiet, not offering her name or asking for his. Ethan had met all kinds of stranded drivers, some panicked, some rude, some too proud to admit they didn't know where the hood latch was. But this woman was different. She wasn't helpless, just stuck. Like someone who was used to being in control and didn't quite know how to handle this one small loss of power. "Should be good now," he said, unclipping the cables and closing her hood with a gentle thud. "Try starting it." She nodded once and slipped behind the wheel. A second later, the engine purred back to life, smooth and even. She stepped out again, her brows lifting slightly, impressed. That was fast. Ethan gave a shrug. Battery was just low. Probably left the lights on. She glanced at him, something unreadable in her gaze. Or maybe fate wanted me to meet a stranger on the side of the road. He raised an eyebrow but didn't bite. He was used to people saying things they didn't mean, flirting sometimes or covering nerves with humor. This felt more observant, as if she wasn't talking to him exactly, just noticing out loud. "Do I owe you anything?" she asked. "Nope," he replied, already heading back to his truck. "Just part of the job." She looked like she might argue, but then she stopped herself. Instead, she called out, "Thank you." Ethan gave her a half wave and opened his driver's side door. She stayed where she was, watching him go. Something about the way he didn't ask for her name, didn't pry, didn't linger, threw her off balance. People always wanted something, but this man, he just gave. And in that silence between them something shifted. Not a word exchanged, not a name revealed, but a spark, Oh, it was already lit. The bell above the garage door jingled as Ethan stepped into Carter's auto, the scent of oil, rubber, and old coffee welcoming him like a worn-out blanket. The heater clanked in the corner, doing its best to fight the cold, creeping through the cracked windows. Hank was already at the front desk, flipping through a thick binder of repair orders with a pen tucked behind one ear. "You're late," Hank muttered without looking up. "Helped someone jump their car," Ethan said, hanging his coat on the hook by the office door. "Battery died outside town." "Was she at least pretty?" Hank asked, half teasing, half curious. Ethan grabbed a clean rag from the counter and wiped his hands, even though they weren't dirty. Didn't ask her name, just helped and left. Hank finally looked up. "That's the problem with you, kid. You fix things, then walk away before you know what they meant." Ethan smirked, but didn't answer. He headed for the lift where an old Chevy pickup sat waiting, hood open like it was gasping for air. His world was made of spark plugs and timing belts, brake pads and coolant leaks. Simple things, tangible problems with tangible solutions. By mid-morning, he was elbow-deep in the engine bay, humming to himself, the earlier encounter already fading like exhaust on cold pavement. It wasn't unusual for him to help people. He'd towed a tractor with his own truck last month and welded a farmer's broken trailer hinge on his day off. Helping wasn't something he kept score on. It was just part of the rhythm. Still, her face flickered in his memory more than he expected. That coat too thin for the weather, the way she didn't try to fill the silence with small talk. Her thank you had been soft but not empty, like she wasn't used to needing help, and even less used to receiving it freely. Ethan shook it off. He had a dozen things to do and a paycheck that barely stretched past rent. The woman in the white coupe? Just another car. Just another job. That's what he told himself, over and over. The city stretched out beneath her like a painting she'd grown tired of. Glass towers reflecting gray skies, cars crawling like ants far below. A skyline that used to thrill her now just looked like steel and stress. Vivian Cross stood behind the floor-to-ceiling window of her corner office, coffee in hand, heels silent on the polished marble as she stared out, not really seeing any of it. On her desk, beneath a half-read report and an unopened email flagged urgent, sat a plain piece of paper, no letterhead, no signature, just a name, Ethan, and a 10-digit phone number scribbled in blocky, grease-smudged handwriting. She picked it up again, thumb brushing the corner as if she could rub away her hesitation. It wasn't like her to pause. She ran an empire. Cross Automotive wasn't just a company. It was a legacy, a machine built by her grandfather, expanded by her late father, and now commanded by her. Her decisions didn't waver. Her instincts didn't question. But something about that man, Ethan, had thrown her off. He hadn't asked who she was, hadn't tried to impress. He'd jumped her car like it was Tuesday and she was anyone. And when she offered him money, his refusal had been so casual it almost stung. Not out of pride, but because he genuinely didn't care. No one in her world did anything without calculating the cost. She turned from the window and sat down, ignoring the tablet blinking with reminders. Investors wanted numbers. Her board wanted a more aggressive acquisition strategy. HR was screaming about culture. And somewhere in all that noise, Vivian had realized something terrifying. She didn't remember the last time someone looked her in the eye and saw a person, not a paycheck, until him. She tapped the number into her phone, hovered over the green call button, then stopped. Not yet. Instead, she slid the note into her top drawer and shut it softly. For the first time in weeks, Vivian smiled. Not the kind she wore in meetings, but the quiet kind that crept up when something unexpected broke through the surface. She didn't know what she'd do with his name, not yet. But she knew one thing. This wasn't over. Marissa Keller walked with purpose, tablet in hand, heels clacking through the hallway like a countdown clock. She was Vivian's right hand, equal parts gatekeeper and fixer, known for her unshakable poise and her ability to bury a crisis before it ever made the news. So when Vivian handed her a list of underperforming garages in their rural division and said, "I want eyes on these, personally," Marissa didn't question it, but she noticed the shift. Vivian's tone wasn't sharp, it was curious, almost soft. That was new. "Looking for anything in particular?" Marissa had asked, flipping through the list. Vivian's eyes lingered on the window. "No, just see what's worth keeping." But Marissa had been working for her long enough to know when something didn't add up. Her boss didn't do sentiment, she did results. And yet, tucked at the bottom of the page in faint ink was a handwritten note. Maple Ridge, garage near Route 9, no name, no address, just a question mark. The next morning, Marissa drove out in a company SUV. Polished, anonymous, forgettable. She visited 8 garages that day, all part of the Cross Automotive family, though barely recognizable as such. Most were franchises run by tired owners and thin staff, places with outdated lifts and clunky billing systems, places that made money on luck, not loyalty. But Maple Ridge wasn't on the list, so she asked around at a diner, showed the waitress a rough map, and said she was looking to relocate her uncle's business. The waitress didn't bat an eye. "You want real work? Go see Carter's Auto, old guy named Hank, but the one who actually fixes stuff is Ethan." The name hit Marissa like a small, invisible jolt. She found the garage 15 minutes later, modest, clean in the way that said pride, not polish. A chalkboard sign outside read, "Brake special today. Honest work, fair price." Through the bay window, she saw him. Ethan. Working on a car, sleeves rolled, focused. No sales pitch, no flash, just quiet competence. Marissa didn't get out of the car. She didn't need to. She had what she came for. Vivian would want to know. And for once, Marissa had no report, just a name. The envelope was too crisp to be junk mail. Thick cardstock, no window, his name printed in bold letters across the front. Ethan Cole. No return address, no stamp. It had been hand-delivered, Hank said, by some lady in a blazer who looked like she'd never set foot in a garage. Ethan opened it with a screwdriver. Inside, an ivory invitation card, clean and elegant, embossed with silver script. A corporate seal in the corner. Cross Automotive. The letterhead alone made his brow furrow. He read it once. Then again. And then he blinked, like the words might change. "We cordially invite you to attend a private leadership event hosted by Cross Automotive at our downtown headquarters. Travel, accommodations, and all expenses will be covered. Business casual attire suggested. We believe you have something special to contribute." Ethan snorted. He held the card between his fingers like it might bite. "This a joke?" he muttered, flipping it over for hidden strings or fine print. Nothing. Just directions, a date, and a time. 3 days from now. Hank, who was tightening a lug nut on a customer's Subaru, didn't even look up. Maybe someone finally noticed your charm and winning smile. Ethan dropped into the folding chair near the mini-fridge. "I don't get it. Why me? I've never even applied for anything with Cross. They own half the garages in the state, and I'm the guy who fixes Mrs. Langley's rust bucket every Thursday." Hank glanced over, wiping his hands. Maybe that's exactly why. Ethan rolled the card into a loose tube and tapped it against his palm. He didn't trust suits, never had. They talked big and left grease under their nails only if it was metaphorical. If this was some recruitment scam or sales pitch, he didn't have the time or patience for it. He nearly tossed the invite in the trash, but he didn't. Instead, he slid it back into the envelope and tucked it into his glove box, just in case. Because deep down, even if he wouldn't admit it out loud, something about that white coupe still lingered in his thoughts. And some part of him was starting to wonder, what if this wasn't random at all? The late afternoon light slanted through the open garage doors, painting long streaks of gold across the concrete floor. Dust floated in the air like lazy fireflies, catching in the shafts of sun that warmed the otherwise chill air. Ethan stood at the workbench, pretending to organize sockets he already knew were in the right place. The invitation was still tucked in his back pocket, folded and creased now from the number of times he'd handled it without making a decision. Hank leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, wiping grease from his palms with a rag that had seen better decades. His truck, his pride, was parked half done in the bay, engine mid-repair. But the old man wasn't in a rush. He was watching Ethan with the kind of quiet patience that only comes from someone who's spent most of their life figuring out engines and people in equal measure. "You gonna keep pacing like a caged possum," Hank said finally, "or are you gonna tell me what's actually eating at you?" Ethan exhaled through his nose, pulled out the invite, and handed it over. "Got this a few days ago. Cross Automotive wants me to come to some leadership thing in the city. All expenses paid." No idea why. Hank read it slowly, lips moving a little as he took it in. Then he handed it back. "Well, hell," he said. "Maybe it's time the world sees what you're made of." Ethan chuckled, but it was dry. "Come on, Hank. You know how these things go. They bring in some guy like me, show him a shiny office, pitch a program, then drop him back here with a coffee mug and a pat on the back." "Maybe," Hank said, "but maybe not. Maybe somebody saw the way you fixed that war vet's truck in the middle of a snowstorm last January, or the way you explain rotors to folks like they're not stupid. Maybe someone up in that tower is tired of empty suits and they're looking for someone real." Ethan didn't reply, just stared at the invite. "You ain't got roots in this floor, son," Hank added. "You're not stuck. You're just scared of being seen for more than what you already are." Ethan turned the card over again in his hand, the embossed letters catching the light. Maybe, he thought, just maybe. Hank was right. The city hit him the moment he stepped off the train. Fast, loud, and too polished for comfort. Glass buildings shimmered in the morning light like they were trying too hard. People moved with purpose, heads down, coffee in hand, earbuds in, as if the sidewalk was just a treadmill to something more important. Ethan stood still for a second, toolbox in one hand, duffel slung over his shoulder, wearing the only suit he owned. It was a little too stiff in the shoulders and a shade too dark for spring, but it was clean, pressed, respectable. He felt like an engine part that didn't quite fit under the hood. The rideshare car was waiting just where the app had said it would be, its driver tapping the steering wheel in time with a beat Ethan couldn't hear. The man didn't say much, which Ethan appreciated. He spent the ride staring out the window at a blur of unfamiliar buildings and unfamiliar lives. At the Cross Automotive Tower, the world shifted again. It was too quiet in the lobby. Not the peace and quiet kind, more like the hush of money. Polished marble floors, tall ceilings, receptionists who looked more like models. He walked across the room and felt his work boots echo, even though he wasn't wearing them. "Ethan Cole," he said, approaching the front desk. The woman behind the counter gave a perfect smile and typed something. "Welcome, Mr. Cole. You're expected upstairs. Floor 42. Elevators on your left." He nodded, gripping his toolbox a little tighter, as if it might anchor him to something real. When the elevator doors slid open, he stepped inside and stared at his reflection in the metal. He adjusted his tie, still didn't look like himself. By the time the doors opened, his heart was knocking a little too loud. The office space was all glass and soft lighting, designed to impress, not invite. Everyone looked like they belonged here, everyone but him, and yet someone had sent for him. He wasn't sure if he was walking into a meeting or a mistake, but he was here now. City miles or not, he'd come too far to turn around. The conference room was twice the size of his garage and felt colder despite the sunlight pouring through the glass walls. Sleek chairs surrounded a long table that looked like it had never seen a scratch. Screens on every wall flashed corporate slogans, mission statements, visions that sounded like poetry written by people who never got their hands dirty. Ethan stood near the back, uncomfortable in the tailored suit someone from Cross Automotive had dropped off at his hotel that morning, an unspoken upgrade from the one he came in. People milled about with champagne flutes and practiced smiles. Most of them didn't even look his way, and why would they? He wasn't one of them. He wasn't holding a resume or pitching a startup. He was holding a travel mug of black coffee, still too hot to sip. He was about to leave. Then he saw her. Vivian Cross walked in like the room had been waiting for her. Sharp heels, black blazer, and the kind of calm that didn't come from power, but from owning every inch of space she entered. Her gaze swept over the room, pausing when it found him. She moved through the crowd without a word. People parting, like instinct, knew she wasn't to be stopped. When she reached him, there was no small talk. "I didn't just need a jumpstart, Ethan," she said, voice low but certain. "I needed someone real." Ethan stared at her for a long beat, trying to piece together the woman in front of him with the one who'd stood beside a dead battery on a frozen roadside. "You're Vivian Cross." "Yes." "And you sent me here?" "I did." He ran a hand along his jaw, the beginning of a skeptical smile forming. "You always recruit people this way?" She tilted her head. "No, usually I don't recruit at all. But that morning, the way you helped me without knowing who I was, without asking for anything, it stuck with me." The silence between them hummed like tension in a wire, pulled tight but not ready to snap. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. Vivian didn't blink. "Not what I want from you. What I want with you." And in that moment, Ethan wasn't sure which was more dangerous, the question she hadn't answered yet, or the one she'd just planted in his chest. They sat across from each other in a private lounge, tucked behind the glass maze of the executive floor. The city pulsed outside the window like a distant heartbeat, but inside it was quiet. No boardroom pressure, no staged applause, just her, him, and a pair of untouched espressos cooling on the table between them. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed. He was still trying to figure out the angle. The suits, the invitation, the shiny tower, it all felt too curated, too perfect. He wasn't used to people like Vivian crossing into his world unless something was broken. She cut through the silence like she always did. "I'm rebuilding part of the company." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Didn't realize it was broken. Vivian allowed the corner of her mouth to twitch upward, half amusement, half approval. "Not the numbers, the heart. We've got locations in every corner of the country, but too many of them feel hollow, cold. We've lost the trust that got us here." "And you think I can fix that?" he said, his voice low but edged with disbelief. She didn't flinch. "I think you represent what people used to trust in a mechanic, someone who looks them in the eye, someone who listens before quoting a price, someone who doesn't sell them 4 tires when they only need 1. Ethan stared at her, jaw tight. "That's not a job, that's just doing it right." "Exactly," she replied. "And I want to bring that back, everywhere. I need someone to help retrain our mechanics in what real service looks like, not just procedures, principles." He blinked. "You want me to teach people how not to lie?" Vivian smiled, this time without restraint. "Yes, for a start." He looked away toward the window. The skyline shimmered like a challenge. This wasn't his world, and yet some part of him was leaning forward already. "You'd start with a trial," she added. 3 weeks. Pick the garage you want. We'll handle the logistics. You show us what honest looks like and what it could be." Ethan glanced down at his hands, calloused, scarred, steady. He'd spent years fixing broken engines. Maybe now he was meant to fix something bigger. By the time Ethan rolled back into Maple Ridge, the town had already heard something was up. He hadn't told a soul, but small towns had their own ways of knowing things. Someone saw him in that suit. Someone else spotted the Cross Automotive name on a hotel reservation. And before the week was over, the local diner was serving pancakes with a side of speculation. "You joining the suits now, Ethan?" old Mr. Parson asked, leaning over his chipped coffee mug like it held more truth than caffeine. Even Hank gave him a look when he stepped back into the garage Monday morning. Not judgment, just curiosity, sharpened by something older. Hope. "So?" Hank asked, arms deep in the hood of a Chevy. "They offer you the moon?" "Something like that," Ethan muttered, tossing his bag onto the tool bench. "You gonna take it?" Ethan didn't answer. The truth was, he hadn't decided. The idea of uprooting everything, even temporarily, gnawed at him. He'd built a life here, not fancy, not loud, but solid. The kind that didn't need press releases or trial rolls. Just trust. Oil-stained trust. And yet, he couldn't shake the conversation with Vivian. The way she'd looked at him, not like a pawn, not even like an employee, like someone she genuinely believed could make a difference. That was the part that scared him most. At night, he lay awake in his small apartment above the garage, staring at the ceiling while the radiator ticked and popped. The offer sat on his nightstand, untouched but impossible to ignore. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the title. It was the idea that if he said yes, things would change. And once you stepped out of a small world, it didn't always welcome you back. The next morning, he showed up to work, rolled up his sleeves, and got back under the hood of a pickup with a bad water pump. Grease on his fingers, wrench in his hand, the world made sense again. By noon, he told Hank, "I'm not doing it." But the words felt borrowed, like someone else's voice. Because somewhere deep down, the offer was still whispering. And it wasn't done with him yet. The day had started like any other. Early, cold, and wrapped in routine. Ethan was elbow-deep in an old station wagon's engine, trying to coax life out of a part that should have been retired 5 years ago. The radio buzzed faintly in the background, half music, half static, as he worked in silence. He liked it that way. Noise in the world didn't always need an answer. Just after lunch, the bell above the garage door jingled. "Ethan?" came a voice he recognized instantly. Mrs. Thompson. She was in her 70s, sharp as a tack, always wore a blue windbreaker no matter the season. She'd been bringing her car to Carter's Auto for as long as Ethan could remember, even before he had his own toolbox. He wiped his hands and came out front. "Afternoon, Mrs. T. What's up?" She gave a sheepish smile. "Car's making a noise again. Thought I fixed it with prayer. But turns out God wants me back in your garage." Ethan chuckled and took her keys. "Let's take a look." The problem was small, nothing urgent. But he kept her car anyway for the afternoon, told her to come back by closing. He liked giving her an excuse to rest at the diner, maybe see a few friends. She lived alone now, widowed. The car was her freedom, her independence, and Ethan knew that without ever needing to ask. When she picked it up, she tried to pay him double. He waved it off. "I didn't do anything special," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "You never think it's special, Ethan, but you always show up when people need you. That's a rare thing." She patted his hand, then got into her car and drove off slow. That night, Ethan sat in the garage long after the lights were off. Just him and the stillness. The offer was still on the table, still waiting. He picked up his phone, thumb hovering over Vivian's number. Then, with a steady breath, he pressed call. She answered on the second ring. "I'm in," he said. And just like that, something shifted. Not in the world, in him. The Cross Automotive Training Center in downtown Chicago looked more like a luxury showroom than a place to turn a wrench. Gleaming tile floors, digital dashboards, touch-screen terminals mounted to every workbench. The air smelled like expensive leather and antiseptic, cleaner than any garage Ethan had ever stepped foot in. Too clean, like it had never seen real sweat. He adjusted the name tag clipped to his shirt, Ethan Cole, guest technical advisor, and tried not to fidget. Half the guys in the room wore uniforms without a single grease stain. The other half looked fresh out of business school, more comfortable holding a tablet than a ratchet. They sat in rows like it was orientation. A few leaned back, arms crossed, waiting for him to say something profound. Ethan cleared his throat. "I don't do PowerPoints." A few chuckles, a few blank stares. "I know you've all been through the training videos, and I'm sure there's a manual somewhere in this building thicker than a cinder block. But if you want to know how to earn a customer's trust, it's not in there. Someone in the front raised a hand. So where is it? Ethan glanced around the room, then pointed to the beat-up Dodge Dakota parked behind him, the designated practice vehicle. It's in that truck. He rolled up his sleeves, tossed the clipboard aside, and waved a few of them forward. Pop quiz. Let's say this guy comes in with a knock in the engine. First instinct? Run diagnostics, said one tech. Quote, full engine replacement, joked another. Ethan grinned. Wrong. You ask him what he hears. You ask when it started. You listen, not just to the truck, but to the man. People don't always come in for repairs. Sometimes they just need to know someone's paying attention. For the next 2 hours, he taught the way he always had, by showing, not telling. By letting them strip a bolt too far, then teaching how to backtrack. By explaining what a worn serpentine belt feels like under your fingers, not just how it looks on a screen. By the end of the day, the silence had shifted. They weren't just listening. They were learning. And Ethan, he was starting to believe he belonged here after all. The boardroom was everything Ethan expected it to be. Long table, tall chairs, glass walls that made the whole place feel like a fishbowl full of expensive suits and egos. The windows behind him framed the skyline like it was a piece of art. But Ethan didn't care for the view. He cared about the dozen sets of eyes now staring at him like he'd wandered in through the wrong door. Vivian sat near the head of the table, arms folded, unreadable. She hadn't warned him much, just said, "Be honest. That's why I'm bringing you in." So he was. "I don't know what most of you do day to day," Ethan began, hands braced on the back of an empty chair. "I don't know what your KPIs are or how you measure growth, but I know this. If you keep running your garages like assembly lines, you're going to lose the one thing that keeps people coming back. Trust." A few eyebrows rose. One executive, silver hair and cufflinks that cost more than Ethan's rent, leaned forward. "And what exactly do you suggest we do? Spend more time coddling customers?" Ethan didn't blink. "No, I'm saying talk to them like they're human. Don't just fix the problem, explain it, show them. People aren't stupid, they're just used to being treated like they are." A murmur moved through the room. Some scribbled notes. Others didn't bother to hide their skepticism. Another exec spoke up, his tone dry. "So your solution is to slow down every job for the sake of a conversation?" Ethan let out a slow breath. "My solution is to stop treating every customer like a transaction. You say you want to be the most trusted name in auto repair? Start acting like it." Silence. Not the kind that follows agreement, the kind that signals discomfort. But Vivian smiled. Later, as they stepped into the hall, she glanced at him. "That was risky." Ethan shrugged. "You said be honest." "And I meant it," she said, her voice quieter now. "They just haven't heard real in a while." He smirked, tugging at his sleeves. "Well, they have now." And whether they liked it or not, Ethan Cole had just slammed the brakes on business as usual. The city was quieter after dark. The buzz softened, lights blurred into gold on the pavement, and the pace slowed just enough to breathe. Ethan stood outside the training center, sleeves rolled up, collar loosened, hands still smelling faintly of oil despite washing them twice. He was about to call a cab back to the hotel when a black sedan pulled up beside the curb and the passenger window rolled down. "Vivian." "No tie?" she said, smiling slightly. "Didn't suit me," he replied. "Get in." He hesitated for half a second, then opened the door and slid into the seat. The car was warm, the leather soft, the silence between them easy for once. They ended up at a small bistro tucked away on a quiet side street. Nothing flashy, nothing with a logo, just candles on the tables, wood-paneled walls, and the kind of quiet you could sink into. "I figured you'd need a break from chrome and glass," she said as they were seated. Ethan looked around. "Didn't think you ate anywhere without a dress code." She smirked. "You'd be surprised." Over grilled salmon and roasted vegetables, the conversation drifted. It wasn't shop talk, not performance metrics or expansion strategies. It was real. He told her about his dad, the man who taught him how to rebuild an engine before he could legally drive, and who drank himself into silence when the family lost everything. About fixing cars because it was the only thing that made sense when people didn't. Vivian listened, not like a boss, like a woman hearing something that mattered. Then she spoke. About inheriting a company before she was ready. About losing her mother at 16. About trying to prove herself in boardrooms where her voice had to be twice as sharp to be heard half as much. And about how somewhere along the way, she'd built an empire that felt more like a fortress. They weren't that different, really. Two people carrying things they never asked to hold. When the plates were cleared and the check quietly paid, she looked across the table, her voice softer now. "Thanks for not treating me like a title." Ethan leaned back, eyes steady. "Thanks for not treating me like a project." It wasn't a date, not yet. But something shifted in that dim corner booth. Something that had nothing to do with engines and everything to do with understanding. The night air was cool when they stepped outside the restaurant, the city lights flickering above them like stars that had lost their way. They didn't say much at first. They just walked, side by side, unhurried, no destination in mind. The kind of walk where silence isn't awkward, just space for something deeper to surface. Vivian tucked her hands into the pockets of her coat. "My father used to say, the only thing more expensive than failure was emotion. He built an empire by ignoring both." Ethan glanced at her, the words sinking in. "Sounds like someone I used to know." She looked over, waiting. "My dad," he said. "He ran the garage before Hank did. Good mechanic, better teacher. But life, it didn't go the way he thought. He lost the house, the marriage, the fight in his eyes. One night, he just stopped coming back." Vivian didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. Ethan kept walking, hands deep in his pockets. "I was 17. The garage was the only place that made sense after that. Bolts don't lie to you. Engines tell the truth if you listen." Vivian nodded slowly. "When my father did show up, it was usually to lecture me on margins or to remind me who the real shareholders were. But when I was 10, he let me sit in the driver's seat of his vintage Cross Phantom. That was the last time he looked at me like I mattered." They reached a quiet park bench near the Riverwalk and sat down, city noise dimming behind them. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring out at the water. "Funny how machines can be more dependable than people." Vivian gave a quiet laugh. "They break down, but at least you know why." He looked at her, something raw in his voice. "You ever get tired of pretending you're fine?" "All the time," she admitted. "But it's easier when you're around someone who doesn't need you to be." They didn't touch, didn't lean in. But something unspoken passed between them, two people cracked in different places, realizing the shapes of their broken edges fit. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. Maple Ridge looked different after the city, not in the buildings or the roads. They were still the same faded storefronts and crooked mailboxes, but in the way Ethan saw them now. The pace felt slower, the air quieter. And yet, beneath that familiar stillness, something felt off. When he pulled into Carter's auto, the first thing he noticed was the envelope taped to the office door. Thick paper, bold logo stamped on the front. Sable Tech Automotive Group. His stomach tightened. Inside, Hank was at the counter, arms folded, jaw clenched in a way Ethan hadn't seen in years. The old man didn't look up when Ethan walked in. He just slid the letter across the counter. "They're buying up shops all over the state," Hank muttered. "Now they want ours." Ethan picked up the letter, scanned the contents. Legal slick language, promises of modernization, equipment upgrades, a quick, clean buyout. No mention of loyalty, no mention of people. "They want the location," Hank added, bitter. "Not the history, not us." Ethan dropped the letter like it was radioactive. "Why now?" Hank shrugged, though the motion looked tired. Maybe they heard the town's changing. Or maybe they're just vultures circling for scraps. It wasn't just any company. It was Thorne Auto Group, Vivian's biggest competitor. Bigger, louder, richer. Known for slashing staff, replacing people with machines, gutting small-town shops for parts. Ethan remembered the name from a meeting 2 weeks back. Vivian had barely concealed her disgust when it came up. "They'll change everything," Ethan said quietly. "Already sent a rep," Hank replied. "Young guy, shiny shoes, smelled like cologne and dismissal, said we've got a month to decide." Ethan stood there, the weight of everything he'd seen in the city pressing down on him. The people at Carter's, Mr. Langley, Mrs. Thompson, the high school kid who'd been shadowing him on weekends, they didn't deserve to be replaced by a touchscreen and a quarterly sales quota. This wasn't just a garage. It was the heart of a town that still trusted handshakes and honest work. And now, that heart was under threat. Ethan looked at the letter one more time, then at Hank. "We're not selling." And for the first time since he got back, Ethan knew exactly why he'd come home. The sun hung low in the sky as Ethan leaned against the side of Carter's auto, arms crossed, boots planted in gravel that had felt like home since he was a teenager. The town buzzed around him in its usual rhythm, faint hum of lawnmowers, screen doors slamming, someone's dog barking at nothing. But inside him, there was no peace, just a slow brewing storm. He could feel it, 2 roads stretching in opposite directions, both pulling at something deeper than ambition. Vivian had called that morning. The board had approved the pilot program. They wanted him in Chicago by next week, not as a guest this time, as the face of the whole initiative. "You'd be shaping the future," she'd said, "teaching the next generation what service really means. This could go national." He didn't doubt her. He believed in her, maybe more than he should. But then there was Hank, closing the office door behind him, with tired eyes and decades of grease under his nails. There was the rusted lift they fixed every winter, with elbow grease and prayer. There was the worn couch in the break room, where he'd once cried quietly the night his dad never came home. This place had raised him. It had saved him. Leaving it felt like betrayal, but staying, while Thorne Auto circled like a buzzard, felt like surrender. He stared across the lot as dusk painted the town in muted colors. Every inch of this place had a memory. The scratch in the garage wall from the time he backed in too fast. The tree where he kissed a girl once, years ago. The cracked sidewalk Mrs. Thompson always tripped over but refused to let them fix. What would happen if he left? What would happen if he stayed? That night, Ethan sat on the rooftop above the garage, legs dangling over the edge, phone in his hand. He didn't call Vivian. He didn't tell Hank. He just sat there, caught between loyalty and logic, between the world that made him and the one calling him forward. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't know which one was the bigger risk. It was almost midnight when the knock came. Ethan was in the garage, alone, surrounded by the low hum of a fan and the smell of old oil and metal. He often stayed late when his mind was crowded, tightening bolts that didn't need tightening, rearranging tools already in perfect order. Tonight, he couldn't stop thinking about the offer, about Hank, about this town and what it meant to belong to something that didn't show up on spreadsheets. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked to the front, half expecting to find a customer with a late-night emergency. But when he opened the door, it wasn't anyone from Maple Ridge. It was her, Vivian, dressed in jeans, a soft jacket, hair pulled back, no chauffeur, no corporate armor, just her, standing there under the buzz of the porch light, like she'd somehow stepped out of a different world and landed in his. He blinked. "Vivian?" "I didn't call," she said softly. "Didn't want to give you a chance to say no." She looked around the garage entrance, taking it all in. The faded signage, the smell of gasoline and worn leather, the echo of years lived in every inch. "I came to see where you came from." Ethan leaned against the doorway, heart suddenly unsteady. "This isn't much." "It's everything," she said. They stood in silence for a moment. No city noise, just the creak of the wind and the low moan of a car cooling in the distance. "I needed to understand what I'm asking you to leave," Vivian continued, her voice quieter now. "I've been asking people to follow me for years, Ethan, but I've never stopped to ask what they'd be giving up." He looked at her, really looked. Not as the CEO, not as the woman who handed him a job offer that could change everything, but as someone who had somehow crossed a line she never let herself cross. "You didn't have to come all this way," he said. "I know," she replied, but I wanted to." And in the silence that followed, something shifted, not just between them, but in him. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a door, and she had just knocked. The next morning, the garage woke up slower than usual. Dew still clung to the windows, and the town hadn't quite stirred. But inside Carter's auto, something had already shifted. Vivian stood by the service counter, sipping a mug of black coffee in a chipped ceramic cup that said "Number 1 Mechanic" in fading red letters. Her polished presence looked almost out of place beneath the humming fluorescent lights, but not out of touch. She wasn't here to judge, she was here to understand. Ethan was out back working on an exhaust pipe when Hank walked in from the side lot, wiping his hands with a rag. He paused when he saw her. "So you're the suit," he said, eyebrows lifting. Vivian smiled politely. "I've been called worse." Hank chuckled. "Well, you clean up nice, but you're about 30 years too late to impress me." Ethan emerged just in time to intercept. "Hank, this is Vivian. She's the one behind the new program." Hank looked her over again, but this time with less suspicion. "You're the reason he's been walking around like he's got a million-pound decision in his boots." Vivian stepped forward, offering her hand. "I'm also the reason he might have a chance to change a lot more than tires." Hank shook it, firm but guarded. Ethan gave her the grand tour, or as grand as a two-bay shop with a leaky roof and a stubborn furnace could be. She saw the wall where customers had pinned thank-you notes and baby photos, graduation invites, and a Polaroid of Hank and Ethan, 20 years younger, standing beside a beat-up Impala with matching grease-streaked grins. "This isn't just a job for him," Hank said, walking into the office. "This place raised him, pulled him out of a hole no one else saw." Vivian ran her fingers along the edge of the desk where names had been carved into the wood. She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. "I get it now," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. She turned to Ethan. "You weren't hesitating because you're afraid to grow. You were hesitating because here matters." And in that moment, surrounded by rust, memories, and ghosts that didn't haunt but held, Vivian understood something no resume or boardroom ever could. This wasn't just a garage, it was a soul. The call came just after sunset. Maria Delgado, a single mom who worked double shifts at the diner and still somehow managed to get her kids to school on time every day, showed up at the garage with a car that sounded like it was dying in slow motion. Smoke puffed out from under the hood, the front right tire was bald and humming, and the engine made a sound Ethan described as a wounded blender. "I can't afford a new one," Maria said, voice low, eyes tired. "But if this thing dies, I lose everything." She wasn't being dramatic. No car meant no work meant no rent meant no home. Vivian had been about to head back to her hotel, but when Ethan turned to her with that look, the one that didn't need words, she nodded once and set her purse on the counter. "Let's fix it." The garage stayed lit long after the town went to sleep. The two of them worked side by side, sweat on their brows, grease on their hands. Vivian held the flashlight while Ethan unbolted a cracked manifold. She fetched tools, patched hoses, and got oil on her sleeve without flinching. Somewhere around midnight, she even figured out how to clean a corroded connector with a toothbrush and baking soda. They talked. Not about work, about music, about what it felt like to be 17 and lost, about how sometimes the worst moments are the ones that shape you best. "She reminds me of my mom," Ethan said as he adjusted the alternator belt, holding everything together with tape and grit. Vivian nodded. There are a million Marias out there, but no one ever sees them. We see her, he said. Tonight, we do. By the time the engine roared to life at 3:17 a.m., both of them were exhausted, stained with oil and adrenaline. Maria hugged Ethan, then Vivian. She didn't know who this woman was, not really, but her eyes filled with tears anyway. You saved us, she whispered. Vivian smiled, tired but alive. No, he did. As they watched her drive off, Ethan turned to Vivian, brushing hair from his brow with the back of his hand. Still think I should leave this place? Vivian looked at the glowing taillights fading into the dawn. I think, she said quietly, we need more of this everywhere. Vivian's phone buzzed just after sunrise. She was still in Ethan's garage, her coat draped over a stool, hair tied back, hands faintly smudged with grease. She hadn't slept, neither had he. They'd spent the night fixing something that couldn't afford to break. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something close to peace. Until she read the message. Thorne acquires Maple Ridge lot. Permit filed for new Lux Auto Experience showroom. Her stomach twisted. She read it twice, then 3 times. No mistake. Thorne Automotive, her oldest rival, wasn't just expanding. They were targeting her territory, her people, him. Ethan noticed her face change before she said a word. What is it? She handed him the phone. He read it slowly, jaw tightening with every line. They're replacing the garage? Trying to, she said, voice clipped. They filed for demo, planned to bulldoze the lot and build some chrome and glass showroom where people buy cars they don't need and never talk to a real mechanic. Ethan's eyes darkened. And Hank's just supposed to roll over for that? They probably offered him a premium price, maybe even pressured the landowner. It's what Thorne does. Cut the soul out of a place and replace it with a touchscreen. Ethan stared out the window where the sun was just starting to pour through the open bay doors. The old sign above the garage flickered in the morning breeze. The same one his father once stood under. The one that had survived recessions, storms, and people who'd written the place off 100 times. Not this time, he said quietly. Not here. Vivian looked at him, the fire returning to her voice. Then we fight. He turned to her. How? You're still the outsider. I'm just a mechanic. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. You're not just anything, Ethan. You're the reason people trust places like this, and I'm done watching people like Thorne pretend that trust can be replaced with a vending machine. They didn't know exactly what the plan was yet, but they knew the stakes. This wasn't business anymore. This was personal. It was nearly midnight again, and they sat on the tailgate of Ethan's truck, parked behind the garage, where the world felt quieter, more honest. The stars were out, rare, unbothered by city haze. Crickets chirped in the distance, the kind of background noise that asked nothing from anyone. Ethan sipped a lukewarm cup of coffee from a paper mug. Vivian sat beside him, coat wrapped around her knees, eyes on the gravel beneath their boots like she was measuring every word she was about to say. I've been thinking, she finally said, voice low, about you, about this place. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerous. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Not yet. I've been pushing you to choose between staying loyal to what built you or joining something that could change everything. That wasn't fair. He didn't speak, just waited, let her say it on her terms. She took a slow breath. But what if you didn't have to choose? What if we built something together? That got his attention. I'm not talking about just saving this garage, she continued. I'm talking about using it as the blueprint, the model. A prototype for what every garage in our network should be, community-centered, honest, skilled, human. Ethan turned toward her. You want to turn Carter's into, what, headquarters? She met his eyes. A new kind of flagship, one that's not built in steel and marble, but in grit and trust. No fake polish, just proof. This place could be where it starts, not where it ends. He stared at her, caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. "You'd put your name on that?" "I'd rather put yours," she said. The silence stretched between them, but it didn't feel uncertain. It felt electric. "You think the board will go for that?" he asked. She smiled now, really smiled. "They won't have a choice, not once they see what we're building." Ethan looked at the garage, his garage, and then back at her. And for the first time, the road ahead didn't feel like a fork. It felt like a partnership. The announcement wasn't flashy. No press conference, no dramatic unveiling, no CEOs in suits shaking hands for the cameras. Just a quiet post on the Cross Automotive website titled, "Bringing Integrity Back. A New Chapter Begins in Maple Ridge." Beneath it, a photo. Ethan and Vivian standing side by side in front of Carter's auto, sleeves rolled, grease on their hands, sunlight catching the faded red sign behind them. But inside the company, the move hit like a wrench to the system. The plan was bold, unpolished, and exactly what the industry didn't expect. Vivian called it the Steel and Soul Initiative, a pilot program to transform overlooked, underfunded garages into fully supported training hubs focused on trust, transparency, and hands-on mentorship. And the first location? Carter's. The heart of it wasn't technology. It wasn't about optimizing profits or installing more digital displays. It was about people. About mechanics who actually knew their customers by name. About fixing more than just vehicles. Cross Automotive would fund the infrastructure, new lifts, parts, diagnostic tools, but keep the soul of each garage intact. No rebranding, no sterile makeovers, just a foundation of honesty, one town at a time. Ethan's job wasn't changing, it was expanding. He'd stay in Maple Ridge. He'd train new techs. He'd help pick the next garages to transform, and every one of them would carry something new welded to the wall, a steel plate signed by the lead mechanic, etched with the words, "Built on Trust." It was Vivian's idea. She had it made at a local metal shop. The first one went up that afternoon. Ethan ran his fingers over the letters, rough and cold, then grabbed a wrench and bolted it into the wall himself. A new kind of signature. The news spread fast. Not in headlines, but through whispers. Through customers who showed up not for service, but to shake hands. Through mechanics who called in from neighboring towns asking, "How do we get in?" Vivian stood outside as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, watching the garage glow with a second life. Ethan came out wiping his hands. "You really think this will work?" he asked. She looked at the plate, the garage, then at him. "I think it already is." The new sign wasn't flashy, just clean. Black lettering over brushed metal, bolted to the front wall of Carter's auto, beneath the old wooden placard Hank had carved years ago. It read, "Steel and Soul Training Hub, Site 1. Ethan stood under it that morning, arms crossed, flanked by a small group of wide-eyed young mechanics and a few skeptical old-timers who had been dragged in by curiosity or coffee. Some wore uniforms. Others wore doubt on their sleeves. But they came. The first workshop kicked off in the main bay. Ethan didn't start with a speech. He started with a story about a time he stripped a bolt on a transmission job because he rushed it, and the customer still shook his hand afterward because he'd been honest about it. "You want to know what makes a good mechanic?" he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "It ain't how fast you fix something. It's how people feel when they leave your shop. Do they trust you to tell the truth even when it costs you something?" Then he tossed a wrench into the hands of a nervous 20-year-old from 2 towns over and said, "Let's get to work." They replaced brake pads, diagnosed misfires, changed oil, and laughed more than anyone expected. No charts, no corporate jargon, just experience, passed down like muscle memory. Vivian watched from the sidelines that first day, dressed down, notebook in hand. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. The results were in the air, the energy, the questions, the sparks of confidence as hands grew steadier and voices more sure. Customers showed up too, some for repairs, some just to watch. Word had spread. The shop had always been respected, but now it buzzed with something more. Purpose, vision, heart. Even Hank, who had sworn he was too old for change, pulled up a stool and gave feedback like a professor at a bar. "He's rough around the edges," he muttered to Vivian, watching Ethan guide a new kid through a stubborn belt tensioner. "But he's the real damn deal." Vivian smiled. This wasn't just a test drive. This was ignition, and Ethan was already behind the wheel. It started with a headline: Cross Automotive's New Trust Initiative Exposed. Idealism or Internal Chaos. Ethan read the article 3 times before the words even made sense. His name was right there in bold. Misquoted, cherry-picked, twisted. They made it sound like he'd called the company outdated, the leadership clueless, the industry broken. A few things he might have said, sure, but not like that. Not with that edge. Not as an attack. The quotes were from a private conversation he'd had during a lunch break, off the record, with someone who'd introduced himself as a training consultant, casual, friendly, asking all the right questions, nodding like he understood. Vivian stormed into the garage that afternoon, phone in one hand, printout in the other. She didn't slam it down on the counter, but she didn't have to. "They're calling it a whistleblower leak," she said, voice sharp. "Except this isn't whistleblowing, it's sabotage." Ethan scanned the article again, jaw tight. "Someone planted this?" "One of Thorne's guys. We think he got hired during our last recruiter push, embedded himself just long enough to get what he needed." He set the paper down, wiping his hands on a rag like he could scrub the guilt off too. "And now everyone thinks I'm calling the company a joke." Vivian's tone softened. "Some of them maybe, but not all. And not the ones that matter." Outside, customers still trickled in. Inside, the training floor was quieter than usual. The younger techs had seen the article, read the rumors. Some were unsure. A few looked at Ethan differently, like he might not be the man they thought. "Should I step back?" he asked quietly. "No." Vivian's answer was immediate. "That's exactly what they want. You stepping down would prove them right. You standing firm? That's how we win." He met her eyes. "Then we don't flinch." She nodded. "Not for a second." That night, Ethan stayed late at the garage, writing on the whiteboard they used for lessons. He erased the technical diagram and replaced it with 3 words in black marker: truth, skill, service. And below that, in smaller letters, built, not bought. The system might be cracking, but they weren't breaking, not yet. The lights were hotter than expected. A local news crew had shown up unannounced, cameras rolling, hoping to catch Cross Automotive's golden boy backpedaling or hiding. The anchor, smooth-voiced and all smiles, held a mic like a blade, polite but sharp. "We're here at Carter's Auto, where Ethan Cole, now the face of Cross Automotive's controversial new program, is facing backlash from recent leaked comments. Ethan, do you have a response to those calling this initiative naive or performative?" Ethan stood just outside the garage bay, grease on his knuckles, his work shirt untucked, the smell of rubber and gasoline still thick in the air. The crew expected a statement, a clean corporate deflection, maybe a PR rep standing by. But Ethan had no script. He looked directly into the lens. "I'm not polished," he said, voice steady. "I'm not a brand. I don't use buzzwords or bullet points. What I said off camera wasn't meant for headlines. It was real. And maybe that's what makes people nervous." He shifted his weight, eyes flicking to Vivian in the background. She gave him a small nod. No fear, no coaching, just trust. "I didn't start this program to make a name for myself," Ethan continued. "I started it because too many good mechanics were being replaced by algorithms, because customers walk into repair shops expecting to be lied to, because we forgot that service isn't just about fixing a car, it's about helping people feel safe." The camera zoomed in. The anchor leaned forward, but Ethan didn't falter. "You want someone who's slick? That's not me. You want someone who's honest? Even when it's messy, that's what real service looks like. He glanced back at the garage, where young techs were still working, where Hank was scribbling parts orders on the back of a napkin, where a woman was waiting in the lobby with a baby on her hip and trust in her eyes. "This place saved me," Ethan said. "I'm just trying to return the favor." The broadcast cut shortly after, but the clip didn't die. Within hours, it was everywhere, shared, reposted, quoted. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And sometimes, standing in the fire is the only way to prove what won't burn. By morning, the clip had crossed state lines. By noon, it was viral. It wasn't flashy, no dramatic music, no sleek editing, just Ethan, gritty, blunt, standing outside a two-bay garage with rust on the door hinges and truth in his voice. But somehow, that raw honesty cut through the noise. The internet, so used to filters and fakery, stopped to listen. "I'm not polished. I'm honest." The line became a banner, a slogan, a movement. People started sharing their own stories in the comments. "This reminds me of the mechanic who stayed open late to fix my brakes before a funeral. My dad was like this, no diploma, but he taught me more about integrity than anyone in a boardroom ever did." Can we get one of these steel and soul shops in our town? Within 24 hours, the clip had racked up 500,000 views. Within 72, news outlets that had once mocked the initiative were writing follow-ups. "Authenticity is back," one article read. "The garage that went viral," said another. Vivian's inbox exploded. Independent garage owners reached out from Montana, from Maine, from little towns in Texas and big cities in Ohio. "How do we join? What do we need? How do we start?" The boardroom that had once questioned her vision now scrambled to support it. And the customers? They came. Maple Ridge saw more traffic in a week than it had in months. Cars lined up outside Carter's Auto, some for service, others just to shake Ethan's hand. One woman drove 3 hours with her teenage son and asked if he could shadow Ethan for the day. "You made him believe doing good work still means something," she said. Ethan took it in stride, but Hank could see it. The weight, the wonder. The boy who once fixed engines in silence was now the voice of a revolution he hadn't meant to start. Vivian stood beside him one evening, watching the sun dip behind the garage, painting everything gold. "You didn't mean to go viral," she said softly. "No," Ethan replied, eyes on the road. "I just told the truth." And the truth, it turned out, had horsepower. The boardroom was colder than usual, not in temperature, but in tension. 12 members sat around the polished walnut table, suits crisp, expressions unreadable. The skyline loomed outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, but no one was looking at the view. All eyes were on Vivian Cross. She stood at the head of the table, spine straight, hands calm, even though her pulse thundered in her ears. She had built her career mastering this room, its silence, its skepticism, its undercurrents. But today wasn't about control. It was about conviction. A screen behind her displayed a still from the now viral clip. Ethan, outside Carter's Auto, sleeves rolled, grease on his collar, telling the world what real service looked like. "You've seen the numbers," Vivian began. "The traffic surge, the new customer acquisition rate, the brand sentiment shift. What we're doing in Maple Ridge is working, and not just in dollars, in trust." One board member, older, sharp-eyed, leaned back. "And you're suggesting we roll this out nationwide, turn our clean, efficient operations into community garages?" "I'm suggesting we bring integrity back to the foundation we were built on," Vivian said. "We forgot why people came to us in the first place. We've been optimizing out the very thing they trusted." Another board member cut in. "You're betting the future of this company on a mechanic with no degree and a charming smile." Vivian didn't flinch. "I'm betting it on something rarer than credentials, credibility." The room went still. "I know this initiative doesn't look like the rest of our playbook. That's the point. It's not safe, but neither is pretending we can replace relationships with algorithms and call it progress. She paused. So here it is. We vote, we scale this, we invest in real people, or... She took a breath, steady and full. Or I walk. The words dropped like a wrench onto the boardroom floor. Silence, then murmurs, then voices rising, some in dissent, some in agreement. A few avoided eye contact. One or two looked genuinely shaken. But when the votes were cast, counted, and sealed, 7-5 in favor, Vivian didn't smile. She turned to the screen where Ethan's still image waited. "We just changed everything," she whispered. And for the first time in her career, the boardroom didn't feel like a cage. It felt like ignition. Ethan was under the hood of a rusted-out Ford when the news broke. No cameras, no speeches, just the hum of a socket wrench and Hank cursing in the background about a stripped bolt. Business as usual until Vivian's car pulled into the lot, dust kicking up around the tires like the start of something important. She stepped out in jeans and a gray sweater, no blazer, no heels, no armor, just her. Tired eyes, wind-blown hair, and something unspoken in the way she moved across the gravel, like she'd just come from a battlefield and somehow walked away with everything intact. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag, standing beside the truck as she approached. "Well?" he asked, heart thudding harder than he'd admit. Vivian didn't say anything at first. She just reached into her bag and pulled out a folded document, Cross Automotive letterhead, stamped and signed. The Steel and Soul Initiative, Phase 2, National Expansion approved. He stared at it, then at her. "You won?" She let out a breath that was half laugh, half exhaustion. "We won." He looked at the paper again, then back to the garage, where a young apprentice was adjusting a jack stand, while Hank supervised with a scowl and a donut. "This is real," he said quietly, like the words needed time to catch up to the truth. Vivian nodded. "Every garage like this one across the country, starting next quarter. You're the model, the voice, the foundation." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, he didn't have anything to say. Vivian stepped closer. "The board tried to push back, said it was reckless, sent me legal warnings, but once the public backed us, they had to cave. The pressure was louder than the fear." He shook his head, stunned. "You didn't have to go that far." "I did," she said. "Because you did. And because this—" She looked around the lot, at the faded sign, the line of waiting cars, the honest sweat on every worker's face, is the only part of this company that still remembers why it started. Ethan looked down at the ground, then up at her, eyes full. "You really stayed in the fire." "So did you." And in that moment, standing in front of the old garage that would soon change the future of an entire industry, they both knew. They hadn't just fixed something broken. They'd rebuilt what no one thought could be saved. The plaque came in a small black box. No gold trim, no velvet lining, just clean metal, brushed silver, and a name etched deep enough to last. Ethan Cole, Lead Advisor, Heart of the Chain. Vivian handed it to him outside the garage, the sun low behind her, casting long shadows on the gravel. He took the box slowly, brows furrowed, like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to laugh or be touched. She watched him open it, watched the smile that tugged at his lips when he read the title. "That's a lot of pressure," he muttered, holding it up to the light. Vivian shrugged, but there was warmth behind it. "You're already carrying the weight. Might as well name it." He chuckled, running a thumb over the lettering. "Heart of the Chain? Little dramatic, don't you think?" "You're the reason people believe in it," she said. "Not the logo, not the building. You, the way you talk to customers, the way you teach, the way you don't compromise, even when it'd be easier." Ethan glanced toward the garage bay, where a teen mechanic was laughing with Hank, elbow deep in a brake replacement. "I'm just showing them what someone once showed me," he said quietly. "And now you're showing thousands," Vivian replied. He looked at her, really looked. This woman who once showed up on a cold roadside with a car she couldn't fix and walls too thick to climb. Now she stood in his town, on his dirt, handing him a title he never asked for but had earned in every way. "You sure about this?" he asked, tilting the badge toward her. "Doesn't exactly scream corporate." "Exactly," she said, eyes steady. "We've had plenty of titles. What we need now are anchors." Ethan nodded slowly and clipped the tag onto his shirt just beneath the oil stain that never quite washed out. It looked strange there, new against the old, but somehow right. He glanced at her again, half grinning. "If this gets me out of company-wide meetings, I'm in." Vivian laughed. No promises. And just like that, the man who once turned down a future he didn't believe in had become the face and the heart of something bigger than either of them imagined. The afternoon sun filtered through the wide garage doors of what was now called Carter & Cole Community Garage, though the locals still just called it Ethan's. The place hadn't lost its soul. Same cracked floor, same smell of oil and metal, same chalkboard wall with birthdays, jokes, and Ask Ethan notes scribbled in multicolored chalk. A small crowd of kids sat cross-legged near the front, part of the weekend mentorship program Ethan had started 3 years earlier. One of them, a wide-eyed boy with smudges on his cheeks and 2 big gloves, raised a hand, more curious than shy. "Mr. Ethan," he asked, "how come you're still here? I mean, you built garages all over the country. You're famous. Why didn't you leave for something bigger?" Ethan leaned back against the workbench, arms folded, a smudge of grease across his forearm like it had never left. The room quieted. Even Hank, now mostly retired and half listening in the corner, looked up. Ethan smiled. "Because all it took to start it was a dead battery." The kids blinked, confused, waiting for the rest. He crouched down to their level, elbows on his knees. "I helped someone one morning, cold day, roadside. Just did what I'd do for anyone. Didn't know she was anyone special. Didn't ask for anything. Just gave what I had." "Who was it?" another kid asked. He smiled again, softer now. "A woman who thought she needed a Jumpstart for her car. Turned out she was looking for something else, something people forget matters." "Like what?" "Honesty," Ethan said. "Realness. Someone who wouldn't lie to make a sale. Someone who remembered that under every hood there's a story, not just a machine." They all went quiet, no fidgeting. Just listening now, like the grown-ups did whenever Ethan spoke at town meetings or garage launches. "I stayed," he added, "because this place raised me. And because if a dead battery can start something that big, imagine what a little honesty and heart can still do." One of the kids whispered to another, "That's why he's the heart of the chain." Ethan stood slowly, wiping his hands on his rag, and grinned. "No, you are." And just like that, the next spark had already begun.